There's a lot of confusion about domain names and DNS. What they are, how they work, who does what, and how all the pieces fit together. This video aims to provide an overview of all those pieces and help clear up some of the confusion and misconception. Hi, I'm Adam with Peak Performance Digital. We're a web consulting firm. We provide websites and digital marketing solutions to run, grow, and market your business. Let me just begin by saying that this is not a definitive guide on DNS. It's a simplification aimed at teaching you the foundational concepts that anyone who registers a domain name or manages their own DNS should understand. Lots of books have been written about the topic of domain names and DNS, and I particularly like O'Reilly's DNS and Bind. You can pick it up on Amazon for about $50 and be enthralled by 642 pages of geekery. DNS is like a phone book for the internet. Each service has its own unique IP address. It's something like 142.251.135.174. You don't want to remember all those numbers just to get to a website. Instead, you type something in like google.com to get there. DNS is the thing that takes that name, google.com, and translates it to the IP address so that you can go where you want to go. There are a lot of components and pieces to DNS. First of all, you have the domain name itself. That's something like mycompany.com. Then there's the registrar, which is where you buy and register the domain name. The IP address is what your computer uses to find things on the internet. And of course, there's the DNS server that does the translation between the name and the IP address. Lastly, you have the web services themselves. Things like web servers, email servers, VPN servers, basically anything out there that you want to reach by name. Let's start with domain names. That's something like mycompany.com. It's the thing that you pay for and that is unique to your business. It's your business asset, and your company is responsible for it. You buy, or rather rent it from a service called Domain Registrar. There's lots of domain registrars, and they all pretty much do the same thing. When you're registering your domain name, you want to use one of the more well-established registrars out there. The last thing you want is for the registrar to go out of business and for you to have a problem with your domain name because of that. Keep in mind that there's a governing body for domain registration. They set the prices that the registrars pay, but you'll find varying prices for each one. Just be sure to go with one of the more reputable companies that are known for providing good service without overcharging. Usually a registrar will only charge a couple dollars more than they pay to register the domain name. Typically a domain name costs anywhere between $10 to $14 per domain per year, although most registrars offer discounts for the first year or for registering multiple years in advance. One of the services you want to watch out for is something called privacy protection. It's a great service to have, and it keeps the contact information for the person who registered the domain private. Most registrars will give it to you for free, although some companies such as Bluehost and GoDaddy, they'll charge upwards of $15 per month for it. You'll find that a lot of companies provide more than one service as part of their package that they offer. Some companies will register your domain, provide a web server, provide your DNS service, and host your email all under one price. The fact is, each of these services really are separate things, and in a lot of cases, they should be run by separate companies. One benefit of having all the services bundled together is for ease of administration and billing. Rather than managing 4 vendors, each with their own billing cycles, credentials, and administrative tools, you can do it all in one place. Another benefit is that the services are likely pre-configured to work with each other. Technical support is also streamlined since a single vendor has a complete end-to-end view of any issues they're troubleshooting. This all sounds pretty good, right? Well, it is pretty great, until it isn't. Then it creates major hassles at best and impassable roadblocks at worst. Take email, for example. It's not uncommon for web hosting companies to bundle email services along with their website hosting. Sometimes they do it by combining both services on a single server. Other times they do it by reselling services like Google Workspace or Office 365. Part of the reason they do this is because they know that email is a sticky service and it's extraordinarily difficult and expensive to move from one vendor to another. By bundling them together, they have a much better chance of keeping your business long-term than if they just sold the web services separately. Interestingly, you'll notice that none of the top-tier website companies offer email services. Instead, they rely on their quality of the core services to keep their customers loyal. Bundling website hosting and DNS services seems like it would make sense, and of all the bundled combinations, this is the least objectionable in my opinion. The main issue is that the architecture of DNS benefits from a large, fast infrastructure with lots of other DNS servers. Web hosting companies typically put the DNS services on their web servers, which aren't optimized for fast lookups, and this can have pretty catastrophic consequences for your website speed. Now, the reason I said it's the least objectionable is because DNS services are relatively easy to move in comparison to others. You just copy the records to a new DNS server, then tell your registrar to make the switch. there are a lot of reasons why you would want to decouple your DNS management from your domain registrar. One reason would be to add advanced features, some things like a web application firewall, content delivery network, or content optimization services. Additionally, most registrars don't allow you to delegate access to their control panel. This means that anyone who can log in to change DNS records can also modify your domain registration. This is a major security risk. By splitting the services, you can allow your IT department or your vendors to manage DNS records without running the risk of something happening to your registration. Cloudflare actually takes this one step further and lets you maintain the account for your DNS services while providing access to your vendors to manage them using their own company accounts. Lastly, and most interestingly, some of the major email service providers such as Google and Microsoft bundle DNS services with their packages. The reason they do this is simply because it eases the support burden for them by pre-configuring everything with their settings. While not ideal, this configuration is fine if your IT vendor is also going to manage the DNS server. If you prefer to have your digital marketing or website services provider manage DNS, then it's a big problem. When it comes to DNS records, there's 4 main types that you need to be familiar with, although there are a lot more out there. First, there's the A record, or the host record, and that's what translates domain names to IP addresses. CNAMEs, which are also known as canonical names or aliases, translate a domain name to another name. An MX record, or mail exchange record, says where to deliver email for a particular domain. And a TXT, or text record, delivers miscellaneous information to the internet. So how do all these pieces fit together, and what do they do? Let's take a simplified example of someone going to my website, peakperformancedigital.com, in their web browser. First, you start by typing peakperformancedigital.com in the address bar and hitting the Go button. Your computer then says, I don't know anything about this domain name, let me check with the root servers. Those 13 root servers don't necessarily know where peakperformancedigital.com is, but they know which DNS servers do know. The root servers check their database and say, hey, it looks like Hal and Nellie, yes, those are the names of my DNS servers, know about this domain. Why don't you go ask them? So then your computer reaches out to Hal and Nellie, which are the authoritative servers for peakperformancedigital.com, and they ask, do you know anything about this domain? They answer, sure, it's one of my favorites. What would you like to know? Your computer then says, I want to go to the website peakperformancedigital.com. How do I get there? Hal replies, please wait, your call is important to us. Then digs into its database to find the answer. A few microseconds later, Hal says, okay, I got it right here. The host record for peakperformancedigital.com is 172.67.198.72. Your computer then thanks Hal, makes brunch plans with him for the weekend, then tells your browser the IP address they just received and pulls up the website. This process works very much the same way for subdomains as well. For example, if someone typed in www.peakperformancedigital.com, my DNS server would find the CNAME record for www that points to peakperformancedigital.com. From there, it looks up the IP address for that domain name and goes on its merry way. Email delivery also works similarly. When someone sends an email to info@peakperformancedigital.com, the same root servers are queried, and the sending mail server is told to get the records from my authoritative server. The conversation from the sending email server goes a little something like this. Hey Hal, I want to send an email to info@peakperformancedigital.com. Where do I send it? Hal responds, here are the MX or mail exchange records for the domain. First try aspmx.l.google.com. If that one doesn't respond, here are 4 more servers at Google that can accept mail for the domain. Your mail server then reaches out to Google's mail servers and says, I have an email for info@peakperformancedigital.com. Can you deliver it? Google server then responds, sorry, I'm a little bit busy right now. Well, now your email server's pissed. It then says, fine, I'll just give it to alt1.aspmx.l.google.com instead. Alt1 is excited that someone wants to send email through her and eagerly accepts it. From there, Google's email servers do their magic and deliver the message. Now, of course, in reality, there's a lot more going on than what I just outlined. At its essence, though, this is the process. It doesn't matter whether one company provides all these services or if different companies provide each one. The process and the configuration are still the same regardless. In some of the previous examples, I used the words propagation and time to live, or TTL. As you can imagine, all these record lookups would put a huge burden on the internet if each client had to check the records each time they access something. To ease this strain, DNS takes advantage of a lot of caching, both on your computer and between DNS servers themselves. The TTL, or time to live setting for each domain and record, is one of the things that helps dictate how long a particular entry can stay in cache without being considered stale and being refetched. Contrary to my simplified DNS conversation earlier, your computer most likely doesn't talk directly to the DNS servers responsible for a particular domain. Instead, your computer is configured to talk to its own local DNS server, which in turn does that talking for you. Since your DNS server is looking up countless records all the time, it can cache those lookups and deliver them very quickly. The downside, of course, is that your DNS server's cache might be slightly out of date until the domain's TTL expires and the records are refetched. When we talk about DNS settings taking a while to propagate across the internet, this is what we're talking about. It's that time that it takes for all the various DNS servers to realize that they have stale records and refetch them with the current records. In practice, this means that depending on your TTL settings, any changes you make to your records will take some time before they're seen everywhere. Even though you might have up-to-date records, another DNS server might not. That's why you'll usually hear people say that changes to DNS might take 24 to 72 hours to fully take effect. One challenge that comes up with nearly every company I work with is who does what. The two pieces involved here are 1, who's responsible for registering the domain and paying the annual registration fees, and 2, who's responsible for managing the DNS servers. The answer to the first question is easy. The business that uses the domain name should be the ones to register and maintain it. Not your IT company, not your website company. In actuality, each domain registration can have up to 3 contacts listed: a registrant, an administrative contact, and a technical contact. It's a good idea to review each of these contacts every year and make sure that each contact is correct and current. The registrant contact has the highest level of authority and access for the domain name, and it's considered to be the contract partner. The administrative contact also has full access rights to the domain and is typically in charge of billing and decision-making for the domain name. The admin contact also has rights to transfer the domain name to another registrant. The technical contact is actually the contact with the least control and responsibility for the domain. They carry no liability and have no control over the domain name transfers, but they can assign and control the domain name servers responsible for the domain. To simplify things, I generally recommend that my clients keep all 3 contacts internal rather than assigning them to contractors or partners. The responsibility for managing the DNS servers can get a little tricky, and here I often find friction between the internal IT department, any outsourced IT vendors, internal marketing departments, and contracted website management companies. Because both email and web services rely so heavily on DNS to function correctly, there really is no clear answer. Your best option is to make sure that the party responsible for DNS, 1, knows what they're doing, 2, has good security and privacy practices, and 3, is responsive and cooperative with all other interested parties. Unfortunately, I find all too often that either IT service providers or website service providers lack the correct skills to properly manage DNS. I may be biased, but in my opinion, the responsibility for managing DNS should be on the digital marketing vendor or website service provider, since they're generally the ones who need to make the most frequent changes and updates. I explain it like this. IT services are responsible for communication systems and the systems that keep your businesses running. Digital marketing and website service companies are responsible for the systems that get your business found by customers and prospects. As far as records are concerned, I typically find that IT service providers generally need just the proper records for email delivery and authentication. Those records don't change often, and when they do, it's usually scheduled well in advance. Digital marketing and website service providers, on the other hand, typically maintain a whole host of other records for things like website access, website caching and security systems, identity verification for third-party services like Facebook, Google Business, Bing, and for verifying third-party email marketing companies. And unlike MX records, we don't have the luxury of fallback records just in case a service goes down or needs to be moved to a different host. Now, before you correct me, I do know that there are ways to provide some of this flexibility using CNAME flattening or A-name records. Both of those methods work well, but neither is supported by every DNS provider, and interoperability between DNS providers can sometimes be problematic. So the short answer to the question of who's responsible for what is, your company should be responsible for the domain name, and the party responsible for managing your digital marketing and website services should be responsible for your DNS services. So enough theory. How does it work in practice? Let's run through a few scenarios. The first example is going to be a very simple one. We'll take the domain name leaninginfallingover.com and we'll attach it to a website. I've already registered the domain Leaning In Falling Over using Google Domains, and I've already used my website host GridPane to create the website leaninginfallingover.com. However, you'll notice if we go to that URL, we don't get anywhere. So here's what we need to do. In Google Domains, this is my registrar. I come over to the DNS tab because Google Domains is doing both the domain registration as well as the DNS hosting. And we'll keep them combined like this just for this example. So here on the DNS tab, I'm going to click in the hostname box, and it automatically pre-populates with leaninginfallingover.com. So I don't need to put anything in there. The type of record that we'll create is an A record. And for the data, I'm going to come back here to my web host and grab the IP address for that server and just paste it right in here. When I hit save, it creates the record for me. This TTL of 1 hour, this is just saying how long the record's going to live in cache before a computer has to go back out and refetch it. Now you'll notice when I go to leaninginfallingover.com, I get the default WordPress website. Now, most of the time you want your website to answer on both the root of the domain as well as the www version of the domain. So if I come in here now and type in www.leaninginfallingover.com, you'll see that, again, I can't reach that page. So how do we fix this? We'll come back to the DNS server where we've already created the A record for Leaning and Falling Over. We'll create a new record this time. Now we're going to create one called www, and we're going to change it to a CNAME record. In there, we're going to leave the TTL the same, and we're going to type in leaninginfallingover.com. So now we have an A record, which is a host record that says leaninginfallingover.com goes to this IP address. Now we've created one that says www.leaninginfallingover.com goes to leaninginfallingover.com, which again resolves to that IP address. Once those records are saved and have a chance to propagate through the internet, we'll come back here to the website, go to www.leaninginfallingover.com, and you'll see that it resolves. You'll also notice up here in the address bar, it says not secure. The reason for this is because it's using the HTTP version of the website, not the secure HTTPS version of the website, because we haven't issued an SSL certificate yet. That SSL certificate is usually something that's issued by the web host. So I'll come back over here to Grid Pane, click into the domain, go over to Domains, and we're going to tick this little box here that says Enable Primary Domain SSL. So it's going to check to make sure everything's okay, and it's going to rewrite the website to use the SSL version for everything instead of the normal one. You'll see that there's a success. Everything's been issued properly. The database has been rewritten. And now if I come back over here and refresh, I'm now going to HTTPS leaninginfallingover.com. So I now have SSL on my primary domain. And if I go to www, it redirects back correctly. That's all there is to getting a website connected to your DNS server. In the previous example, I used Google's DNS console to manage the records. Each DNS server has their own console, and they all look slightly different. At its core, though, the consoles are all just writing plain text files that are human readable. Here's a simplified example of my domain's DNS records. We start off at the top with the SOA record. This stores important information about the domain and the zone. Then we have the A record for peakperformancedigital.com, pointing to 172.67.198.72. Below that, we have CNAME records for mail, schedule, and www. And then below that, we have the MX records that show where to deliver mail for my domain. Below that is a text record. This one is an SPF record that says which mail servers are authorized to send mail from my domain. Next, we're going to set up the MX records for this domain so that it can receive email. We'll come back over here to Google Domains, and now we're going to add a few additional records. In this example, I'm going to pretend that we're connecting the domain to Google Workspace. And if you look inside Google Support, these are the records that it tells you to add. Come back into DNS. We're going to manage those custom records. Now we have to create at least one of those records, but it's best to create them all just in case for some reason one of them fails. So again, we'll start off with the host. We'll leave that blank because it's going to be for leaninginfallingover.com. We'll change the type to MX. I'm going to leave my time to live the same, and I'm going to type in here both the priority as well as the server that it needs to go to. So priority 1 means that this is the first server that it's going to try before any other mail server. I hit save. To add the rest of the email servers, we'll come back in to manage custom records, and this time we'll click on this little box right here that says add more to this record. And you'll see it creates another line underneath of it where I can add in those additional servers. So we'll start here, and I'll add one with a priority of 5 for Alt 1, another one with a priority of 5, for Alt2. Alt3 gets a priority of 10. And Alt4 gets a priority of 10. What this means is that for the domain leaningandfallingover.com, we've got MX records with time to live of 1 hour. The first one that it's going to check is aspmx.l.google.com. If that one fails, then it can use either one of these, Alt1 or Alt2, as a secondary. If both of these fail, then it'll try Alt3 and Alt4. And there it is. We saved the records. And now, if we were to send an email to an address at leaningandfallingover.com, as long as that address existed inside the mail server, it would be delivered. So the next demonstration, we're going to keep the registration with Google, but we're going to move the DNS server from Google to Cloudflare. Starting off inside of Google Domains, you can see it's using the default name servers, which are Google, and we want to transfer that over to Cloudflare. So over in Cloudflare, you can see I'm logged in my account already. You can just go to www.cloudflare.com and create a new account, and it'll walk you through a wizard. I'm going to say add site, putting in leaningandfallingover.com, and it's going to take me to a sales page. Believe it or not, this free plan is very, very good. It's got most of the features that people need, and I highly recommend it for almost anybody. If you do want some of these enhanced features, $20 a month is a very small price to pay for it. But for now, I'm going to select the free plan. Cloudflare is great because it's going to scan for existing DNS records and try to create them for me automatically. It doesn't always get it right, so it's always a good idea to go into your existing DNS server and make sure that everything that it sees is actually correct. In this case, it looks like it grabbed everything. It got our A record, it's got this domain connect, and now it has our CNAME for www that points back to leaningandfallingover.com. It also grabbed all 5 of our MX records. So in this case, I don't need to make any changes. However, if I needed to, I could add records just by clicking this button and going through the menus. But for now, I'm going to click the continue button and we'll go on. The next part of this wizard is saying to remove these following name servers and add the ones for Cloudflare. So as I mentioned before, my servers are Hal and Nelly. So I'm going to click to copy this one, Hal, and I'll go back to Google Domains. And this time I'm going to change this default name server over to custom name servers. And I'm going to tell it that I want to use Hal and Nelly. If I didn't have these in already, I would just click Manage Name Servers and put them in, and hit Save. And then we'll say Switch to these settings. And now sometime in the next hour or so, these DNS settings will take effect. And instead of using Google to resolve names, it'll use Cloudflare. When I'm finished all of that, I click on this button here in Cloudflare that says Check Name Servers. It'll walk you through another wizard to do more. So we'll apply some of these recommendations. Always use HTTPS. This is a good one to use. Always enable auto-minify. I also like this one. And now we're going to go to the overview page. Now that we're on this screen, we're going to tell Cloudflare to check the name servers and see whether it's taken effect. Because DNS changes don't always take effect right away, sometimes we have to check and it'll email us when it's ready. But for now, we'll explore the rest of the important parts of the Cloudflare dashboard. So as it pertains to DNS, the things that you really care about here are right on this DNS tab. We'll click on it, and here again we see the records that we have. One of the big features that Cloudflare has is called proxying. What it does is it hides the IP addresses on the internet and it proxies it through its own systems. That's got a couple advantages. One of them is that it lets you use the web application firewall that's built into Cloudflare. Another one is that it lets you use some of the caching that's built into Cloudflare. And those are some of the big selling features of this service. So when we have the orange cloud on there, it means that those records are proxied and it's taking advantage of those things in Cloudflare. If we don't want to use them, we can just say edit, uncheck that, and save. You'll also notice that the interface inside Cloudflare looks a little bit different than the one inside of Google Domains. I personally think that Cloudflare's interface makes more sense, but it's really a personal preference. So I just received the email from Cloudflare saying that everything is set up and ready to go. I came back into leaningandfallingover.com and I get this screen that says, great, Cloudflare is now protecting my site. And now I can do everything that I want to with my DNS. We don't have the messages in here saying that it's in a pending state. We go to Overview and we don't have any more of the setup boxes. So at this point, we have Google Domains only managing the registration. We come over here to the DNS settings and it's using custom name servers. So any settings that we put inside of DNS here are not going to take effect because it's saying do all the lookups through Cloudflare. And in Cloudflare, we've got DNS set up so that these are the records that it uses. If we needed to change the web server, we could just come right in here and update the A record. If we needed to add any new MX records, we could do that. If we needed to put any other records in for any other reason, we could do that right through the Cloudflare interface. And one of the great things about Cloudflare is that these changes take effect very, very quickly, much faster than most other DNS servers out there. For this last demonstration, I'm going to show you how we can transfer registrars from one to another. Now keep in mind, every registrar is going to be different, but again, the process will be mostly the same. We'll start off here inside of Google Domains, which is our registrar. We'll come down to registration settings, and there's two things that we need to think about here. One is unlocking the domain, and then the second thing is getting an authorization code to transfer the domain out. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that this domain is unlocked. Now some registrars will not immediately unlock the domain. If a change to the domain has happened recently, usually within about 3 days, it will not unlock it. If you've just registered it, it typically won't let you unlock the domain for a period of time. This is just a security feature on their part. But once the domain actually is unlocked, you'll click on this button to say Get an Authorization Code. And this you want to copy down and keep it in a secure place, at least until the domain transfer has taken effect. Now that I have my domain unlocked and I have my authorization code, I can come over to the receiving registrar. In this case, we're going to use namecheap.com. I know it sounds like it's a budget registrar, but it's actually been around a long time and is very well respected. So here right at the top says transfer to us. We'll say transfer domains. I type in their domain name and hit transfer. It's going to do some checks and it says, great, the domain is unlocked. I say, yes, I do want this to be transferred. Type in that authorization code that we got before and I verify it. It's got a green check mark there. We're good to go. Next, I add to cart. We can see that's going to cost me $9.36 to transfer it in. So we're going to view cart. And here we have all the information about the transfer. So we're going to transfer in leaninginfallingover.com for 1 year. Not going to do auto renew. You can see right here that it's a special rate of $9.18 for the first year. And then it's going to renew at $13.98 per year. Domain privacy is included for free, just as it should be. Now down here, it's going to try to sell us on some extra things. Most of the time, you don't need or want them. SSL, don't pay for this. You can get it free from almost any web host now. VPN, probably not worth the money. Most of this stuff I wouldn't bother with. Even email and web hosting, those things are better done through specialty companies that specialize in email hosting and web hosting. Premium DNS, if you want to spend an extra $5 a month, you're welcome to. Otherwise, use the free Cloudflare and you'll probably have better results with it. Next, we'll confirm the order. Then the last thing we do is create an account if you don't already have one, pay the fee, and then wait. Registrar changes typically don't take effect right away because there is a process that the receiving registrar needs to go through with the sending registrar to make sure that everything's correct and that all the handshakes take place. With Google, for example, they'll tell you right in the documentation that a domain transfer can take 5 to 7 days to complete. Once the transfer is complete, you'll typically get an email confirmation from the receiving registrar. From there, you just log into that registrar to make any changes that need to be made. There's one other thing to be aware of. Just like the internet, most internal company networks rely heavily on DNS. Because of a lack of understanding, it's not unusual to see internal DNS systems configured improperly and causing issues with external name resolution. This topic's quite advanced and well beyond the scope of this high-level overview. I know this is a lot to take in. As I mentioned earlier, this isn't intended to be an exhaustive tutorial or a step-by-step guide. But if you understand these basic concepts, you should have enough knowledge to ask the right questions or to apply what you learned here to your own situation. To learn more about us, go to our website, peakperformancedigital.com, or email us at info@peakperformancedigital.com.